The perfectly painted mailbox. The sun, still kissing the horizon, burnished the manicured lawns with shades of honey and saffron. Mr. Elijah Johnson, a man whose days unfolded with the predictability of sunrise, emerged from his bungalow, cradling a steaming cup of Earl Grey. He paused, a fleeting smile gracing his lips as he surveyed his mailbox, a symbol of order in a world tilting towards disarray, or so it seemed of late. Yesterday had been dedicated to its restoration, sanding, priming, and finally cloaking it in a vibrant white. The new numerals blazed like polished silver, glinting in the morning light. A whimsical touch, a hand-painted bluebird, graced its flank, invariably lifting his spirits. He sipped his tea, the fragrant warmth a comforting balm. "Just so," he murmured, an uncharacteristic utterance that resonated with sincere conviction. He championed the beauty of small things, a quiet act of rebellion against the creeping blight threatening their usually serene community. Harmony Glade, his neighborhood, typically lived up to its name. Lawns obeyed the Tuesday edict, refuse vanished on Fridays, and the annual barbecue constituted high drama. Lately, though, a subtle unease had permeated the air, an atmospheric shift that eluded definition, yet he suspected its origin, her. He strolled down the paved drive, intent on retrieving the newspaper, when he froze. His mug nearly tumbled from his grasp. The mailbox. It was no longer a symbol of order, but a brutal sculpture of mangled steel and fractured timber. The pristine white was defiled by deep gashes, and the shiny numerals lay scattered on the lawn like dislodged teeth. The bluebird, his miniature flight of fancy, had vanished. An icy wave of shock gave way to a slow simmering rage. Who was capable of such spite? And why? He knelt beside the wreckage, meticulously examining the carnage. This was no mere accident. It was a deliberate act of savage destruction. The post had been snapped with brutal force, the box rendered unrecognizable. He scanned the street, hoping to catch a glimpse of the perpetrator. But only the hushed serenity of a Sunday morning met his gaze. Rising slowly, his joints complaining, he carried his tea, now tepid and forgotten, back to the porch, the ceramic clicking softly. He stood motionless, his gaze glued to the ruined structure, his mind a whirlwind of questions. He should call the police, report the vandalism, yet something restrained him. This felt less like a random act and more like a pointed message. Abandoning the idea of contacting the authorities, he headed to his garage and retrieved his toolbox. Nestled among the implements was his grandfather's hammer, a sturdy heirloom that had witnessed generations of labor. He returned to the mailbox, his movements deliberate. The next few hours were spent clearing the wreckage, salvaging what he could. He coaxed the metal back into shape, pieced together the shattered wood, and even recovered fragments of the bluebird. As he toiled, a plan began to crystallize. He would not be cowed by this act of aggression. He refused to let it shatter the peace of his sanctuary, his life. He would rebuild it, sturdier than before. He drove to the hardware store, procuring a new post, thicker and more resilient than its predecessor. He purchased fresh paint, a gleaming set of numerals, and a bag of concrete. He even located a replacement bluebird, slightly larger and more vibrant than the original. Back home, he labored late into the night, fueled by quiet resolve. He excavated the hole for the new post, mixed the concrete, and painstakingly positioned the mailbox. He meticulously repainted the box, affixed the new numbers, and cemented the bluebird in place. By the time he finished, the moon reigned supreme, casting elongated shadows across the lawn. He stepped back to survey his handiwork, a quiet sense of accomplishment blooming within him. It wasn't flawless, not quite. The faint scars of the attack remained, subtle imperfections in the paint. But it stood strong, resilient, unyielding. He knew this wasn't over. The perpetrator would likely return. But he was prepared. He harbored a plan, a quiet, unwavering plan, and he would not be intimidated. He would safeguard his home, his peace, and his cherished whimsy, regardless of the cost. The rebuilt mailbox, bathed in moonlight, stood as a silent declaration of his defiance. Agnes the Awful. Agnes Abernathy steered her golf cart down Magnolia Lane, the electric motor whining a high-pitched protest against the slightest incline. Her lips pursed, a permanent fixture honed by years of finding fault. A stray dandelion dared to poke its yellow head through the manicured lawn of number 14. Agnes made a mental note. Rule 3, subsection C clearly stated that lawns must be weeded weekly. Honestly, some people. She adjusted her oversized sunglasses, the better to see all the infractions, of course, not to hide the wrinkles that were creeping around her eyes like insidious vines. The scent of freshly cut grass, usually a source of pride, did little to soothe her irritation. The HOA meeting last Tuesday had been a disaster. 3 whole residents had dared to question her interpretation of the new patio furniture guidelines. 3. The audacity. Then she saw it. Mr. Johnson's mailbox. It stood there, defiant and gleaming in the afternoon sun, a metallic middle finger to the established order. Agnes braked so hard the golf cart lurched, nearly throwing her into the meticulously arranged basket of petunias on the dashboard. That thing, she muttered, the word dripping with venom. It was larger, sturdier, more imposing than the approved, cookie-cutter mailboxes that lined Magnolia Lane. A cold fury simmered in her chest. The nerve of that man! After all the trouble he'd caused, flaunting his disregard for the rules like this. Absolutely unacceptable, she hissed, reaching for her phone. She needed photographic evidence. And then she'd need to, well, she'd figure out the then later. The main thing was that this monstrosity had to go. Agnes Abernathy's family had practically founded the Harmony Glades Homeowners Association. Her grandfather, a man who believed firmly in order and property values, had established the original bylaws. Her father had expanded them, adding clauses about acceptable holiday decorations and permitted paint colors. And Agnes? Agnes had perfected them. She knew every line, every subsection, every loophole that could be used to maintain the aesthetic integrity of the community. It wasn't about power, not really. It was about preserving the harmony. Or at least, that's what she told herself. Truth be told, Agnes felt a certain satisfaction in enforcing the rules. It was a shield against the chaos of the outside world, a way to maintain control in a life that often felt overwhelmingly out of her hands. Her own house, perfectly decorated and immaculately clean, was her sanctuary. And Harmony Glades was an extension of that sanctuary. Anyone who threatened that threatened her. Mr. Johnson, with his unkempt lawn and his persistent grievances, and now this mailbox, was a direct threat. She snapped a photo, the flash glinting off the polished steel. Violation, she whispered, already composing the email in her head. It would be polite, of course. Agnes always prided herself on her professionalism. But it would also be firm. Unyielding. As she glared at Mr. Johnson's mailbox, she noticed something else. A small, hand-painted sign was affixed to the side. She squinted. It read, "Return to sender." Agnes's face flushed crimson. She sputtered, searching for a witty retort, a crushing rejoinder, but nothing came. All that escaped her was an inarticulate growl. The audacity, the sheer, unmitigated audacity. She slammed the golf cart into gear and sped away, leaving a trail of disturbed dust and the faint scent of simmering rage. Mr. Johnson hadn't seen the last of her. Not by a long shot. This was war. Accidents happen? Agnes Abernathy gripped the wheel of her pearl-white Escalade, its bulk a comforting extension of her own self-assuredness. The manicured lawns of Willow Creek Estates blurred past, each a testament to the order and aesthetic she fiercely defended. Today, however, a weed sprouted in her perfect garden, Elijah Johnson's mailbox. She'd driven past it 3 times already, each pass fueling the simmering indignation in her chest. That monstrosity wasn't just an eyesore, it was a blatant disregard for the HOA guidelines, a middle finger to the very fabric of their community. It was too folksy. Too him. Agnes adjusted her sunglasses, the late afternoon sun glinting off the chrome of her SUV. She needed to be decisive. A strongly worded letter clearly hadn't worked. Sometimes a more direct approach was necessary. She slowed as she approached Mr. Johnson's property again. The mailbox stood sentinel at the edge of his driveway, painted a cheery, almost defiant yellow. The sight sent a fresh wave of irritation washing over her. She tightened her grip on the wheel. It happened quickly. One moment she was admiring Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning roses across the street. The next, a sickening crunch echoed through the quiet street. Agnes slammed on the brakes, her heart hammering against her ribs. The Escalade shuddered. She put the car in reverse, carefully pulling back onto the road. Peering into her rearview mirror, she saw it, Mr. Johnson's mailbox, listing precariously to one side, the cheerful yellow paint now marred with a long, white scrape. Agnes took a deep breath, willing herself to remain calm. Accidents happened. Especially with those reckless kids tearing through the neighborhood on their skateboards. Yes, that's what must have happened. She put the car in drive and pulled up in front of Mr. Johnson's house. He was in the yard, inspecting a rose bush, a pair of gardening shears glinting in the sun. He turned as she approached, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Johnson," Agnes said, her voice laced with concern. "I am so sorry. I just saw what happened to your mailbox. Those awful children. I swear they were speeding down the street on their skateboards. I tried to yell at them, but it was too late. They must have clipped it." Mr. Johnson's eyes narrowed slightly, his gaze lingering on the pristine bumper of her Escalade. "Skateboards, huh? Yes. It's a real problem in this neighborhood. They have no respect for property. I've been meaning to call the HOA about it." Agnes forced a sympathetic smile. "I feel terrible. I'll certainly be reporting this. You should file a claim with your insurance company." He straightened up, the shears still in his hand. "I appreciate the thought, Mrs. Abernathy. But I think I can handle it." His voice was even, almost too calm. "I'll just rebuild it." Agnes detected a hint of steel in his tone. She didn't like it. "Well, if you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask. I feel just awful about this." She paused, then added pointedly, "Perhaps this will finally serve as a reminder to adhere to the community standards." That mailbox was rather unconventional. Mr. Johnson's lips quirked into a wry smile. "Unconventional is underrated, Mrs. Abernathy." He turned back to his rose bush, snipping off a dead bloom with a decisive snip. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a mailbox to rebuild." Agnes stood there for a moment longer, feeling a prickle of unease. She couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't believe her story. That he knew. But how could he? She hadn't left any evidence, had she? She forced another smile. "Of course. Well, good luck with that, Mr. Johnson." As she drove away, Agnes glanced in her rearview mirror. Mr. Johnson was standing in his yard, watching her go. His face was still unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, a quiet determination, that sent a shiver down her spine. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Twice is a coincidence. Elijah Johnson wasn't about to let one little fender bender, or whatever Agnes Abernathy was calling it, keep him down. The morning sun, still timid and orange, painted the dew-kissed lawn in a soft glow as he hauled out his tools. He'd spent the previous evening sketching designs, fueled by lukewarm coffee and righteous indignation. The new mailbox wasn't just going to be replaced, it was going to be fortified. He'd procured thicker lumber from the hardware store, seasoned oak that looked like it could withstand a small meteor shower. Forget flimsy screws, he had lag bolts, the kind used in heavy construction. He worked with a determined set to his jaw, each swing of the hammer a declaration of independence. He dug the post deeper, embedding it in concrete he'd mixed himself, the gritty slurry clinging to his gloved hands. He added angled supports, bracing the post against the earth like a fortress wall. By the time he was done, the mailbox stood sentinel, a testament to his resolve. It looked less like a place to receive mail and more like a miniature blockhouse. He even painted a reflective stripe around the base, just for good measure. He stood back, sweat beading on his forehead, and surveyed his handiwork. Satisfied, he gathered his tools, a quiet hum of victory resonating within him. He wouldn't be intimidated. Later that afternoon, the screech of tires shattered the afternoon quiet. Elijah, who was inside reading, felt a familiar jolt of dread. He rushed outside, and there it was again, Agnes Abernathy's beige sedan, this time nosed into the newly reinforced mailbox. The oak post hadn't snapped, but it had been wrenched sideways, the concrete base cracked. The mailbox itself was crumpled, a mangled mess of metal and splintered wood. Agnes was standing beside her car, clutching her chest, her face a mask of theatrical distress. "Oh, Mr. Johnson! I am so sorry!" she wailed, her voice trembling. "The brakes, they failed again. I swear, I barely touched the pedal." Elijah stared at her, speechless for a moment. He glanced at the tire marks on the grass, a chaotic swirl leading directly to his mailbox. Twice? Twice was more than a coincidence. It was a statement. Across the street, Mrs. Henderson, watering her petunias, paused, her eyes widening behind her oversized glasses. She exchanged a quick, significant glance with Mr. Peterson, who was meticulously trimming his hedges 2 doors down. He stopped snipping, his shears clicking shut with a sharp, audible snap. A murmur rippled through the neighborhood, a silent chorus of suspicion and concern. "Again, Agnes?" Elijah finally managed to choke out, his voice tight with disbelief. "Your brakes failed again? In the exact same spot?" Agnes wrung her hands, her eyes darting nervously around. "It's a faulty line, I think. The mechanic said something about it being rare. Terribly rare. But well, here we are. I'll pay for everything, of course. Double this time, for the inconvenience." She pulled out her purse, fumbling with the clasp. Elijah just shook his head, the heat rising in his face. This wasn't about money. This was about something else. Something insidious and deeply unsettling. As Agnes continued her charade, digging for her checkbook, the whispers intensified. Mrs. Henderson leaned closer to Mr. Peterson, her lips moving rapidly. He nodded slowly, his expression grim. The invisible network of neighborhood gossip was humming, each whispered word adding fuel to the simmering tension. Elijah felt the weight of their scrutiny, the unspoken questions hanging in the air. He knew he wasn't imagining it. They saw it too. Twice was a coincidence. 3 times, well, 3 times would be war. The birdhouse camera. Elijah Johnson gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. Another mangled mailbox wouldn't just be an inconvenience. It would be a declaration. A declaration he refused to accept. This time, he wouldn't just replace it. He'd fight back. The hardware store hummed with the Saturday morning buzz of weekend warriors. He bypassed the mailboxes entirely, heading straight for the electronics section. He needed a surveillance system, something discreet, something avian. Birdhouse camera? The pimply-faced teenager behind the counter looked skeptical. "We got wildlife cams, motion detectors, but a birdhouse." "Exactly," Elijah said, sliding a picture he'd printed from the internet across the counter. "I need something like this, but better quality. And a longer recording time." The kid, whose name tag read Kevin, surprised him. "I think I can help. We had a special order return last week. High def, weatherproof, motion activated, and the battery lasts for, like, a month. Dude returned it 'cause it didn't attract enough birds." Go figure. Elijah grinned. Perfect. Assembling the birdhouse camera in his garage felt strangely satisfying. The smooth cedar planks fit together snugly. The tiny, almost invisible lens peeked out from a knot in the wood. He even added a little perch, just for show. Let Agnes Abernathy think he'd finally given up and embraced suburban kitsch. The installation was trickier. He waited until dusk, when shadows stretched long across the manicured lawns of the development. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree near his mailbox. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and impending rain. He chose a sturdy branch, high enough to be out of reach, low enough to get a clear view of the road and, more importantly, his mailbox. He secured the birdhouse with heavy-duty cable ties, camouflaging them with green electrical tape. His heart hammered against his ribs. He felt like a kid again, building a treehouse, but the stakes were far higher. This wasn't about fun, it was about protecting what was his, about reclaiming his peace. The next morning, Agnes Abernathy was watering her petunias when he went to collect the newspaper. He saw her glance at the birdhouse, her brow furrowed. She straightened up, a watering can dangling from her hand, and walked over to the edge of her perfectly manicured lawn. "Morning, Elijah," she chirped, a little too brightly. "Morning, Agnes," he replied, keeping his voice neutral. She tilted her head, her gaze fixed on the birdhouse. "New addition? How charming!" Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thought I'd attract some bluebirds," Elijah said, feigning nonchalance. "Always loved the sound of their song." Agnes chuckled, a dry, brittle sound. "Bluebirds? In this neighborhood? You're an optimist, Elijah." She paused, her gaze hardening. "Still, it's nice to see you're moving on. Putting the past behind you." Elijah met her gaze, unflinching. "Some things are harder to forget than others, Agnes." She shifted uncomfortably, splashing a few drops of water on the sidewalk. "Well," she said, forcing a smile, "I should get back to my petunias. Wouldn't want them to wilt." As she turned away, Elijah noticed her hand trembling slightly. He watched her retreat into her pristine, flower-filled yard. The air crackled with unspoken accusations and simmering resentment. Back inside, he booted up his computer. The birdhouse camera was online, transmitting a crystal-clear image of his mailbox and the quiet suburban street. He replayed the morning's footage, zooming in on Agnes. Her suspicious glances, her forced smile, her trembling hand. It wasn't proof, not yet. But it was a start. He settled back in his chair, a grim satisfaction spreading through him. He had his eye on her. Caught on camera. Agnes Abernathy patrolled the asphalt circle of her driveway, eyes narrowed with purpose. Sunlight glanced off the Buick's chrome, lending it an unexpectedly menacing air. "Just a tap, Betsy," she crooned, patting the dashboard as if confiding in an accomplice. "A little nudge is all we need." A glance in the rearview mirror, a slide of her sunglasses higher on her nose, and a deep breath offered no solace against the turmoil churning within. Johnson's ghastly lawn ornament had to go. Yesterday's debacle with the sledgehammer had left her with a complaining wrist and wounded pride. Obviously, subtlety wasn't her strong suit. But Agnes wasn't one to concede defeat. This time, Betsy would be her instrument. The Buick reversed, tires emitting a sharp, indignant screech. Instead of the street, she aimed straight for Johnson's verdant expanse. With a violent surge, the car leaped the curb, engine bellowing. Agnes gripped the wheel, knuckles bone white, a grimace twisting her features. The mailbox stood sentinel, a gleaming metallic challenge. She floored it. The Buick became a projectile. The impact was a gut-wrenching crunch, metal screaming against metal, followed by the engine's uneven idle. A mangled heap of post and metal lay strewn on the grass. Shifting into reverse, Agnes narrowly avoided impaling a prize-winning rose bush and roared back onto the street, a path of destruction etched in the lawn. Back in his kitchen, Elijah Johnson nursed his coffee, its aroma failing to ease the tension coiled in his gut. Sleep had eluded him, the memory of Agnes's rage-contorted face a persistent phantom. He kept an anxious watch on the security monitor. Still nothing. He'd been glued to the screen since the last incident, anticipating another assault. He sighed, trying to dismiss his anxieties as paranoia. Just as he was about to power down the monitor, a subtle disturbance snagged his attention. Rewinding the footage, his pulse quickened. There it was, Agnes's Buick, a silvery blur of malice, hurtling across his lawn. The sickening thud of destruction. Agnes's hasty retreat. Elijah stared, coffee growing cold in his hand, disbelief warring with fury. He replayed it, and again, the image burning into his memory. No question about it. Agnes Abernathy, in broad daylight, had deliberately vandalized his property. The initial shock solidified into a cold, unwavering resolve. He wouldn't be cowed. He wouldn't be intimidated. He wouldn't let Agnes Abernathy shatter his tranquility. He zoomed in on the offending vehicle's license plate, capturing a crystal-clear shot. Then, he froze the frame on Agnes's face behind the wheel. Her expression was unmistakable, a venomous mask of pure, unadulterated spite. The captured image was saved as Exhibit A. Elijah rose, movements measured and deliberate. He rinsed his cup, the ceramic clink amplifying the sudden hush. A jolt of energy coursed through him, a sense of purpose long dormant. This wasn't just about some rural delivery receptacle. It was about protecting his space, his right to live in peace. He headed for his study, the aged floorboards groaning underfoot. Opening his laptop, his fingers danced across the keys. He was finished playing defense. Time for a counterattack. This was about more than a mailbox. It was about standing up to a bully, reclaiming his ground, and ending Agnes Abernathy's campaign of harassment. A humorless smile touched his lips. She hadn't seen this coming. The indestructible mailbox. Elijah Johnson lost a week to the digital abyss, sustained by stale coffee and simmering resentment. He wasn't after mere postal reception, he sought an impregnable bulwark. His online queries grew increasingly hyperbolic. Unbreakable mailbox, armor-plated letter drop, mail citadel. The results veered into parody until he unearthed a small, family-run metalworks nestled in the Pennsylvania countryside. They specialized in robust steel constructions, primarily for industry, but one corner of their website showcased a mailbox dubbed the Sentinel. It was, in essence, a diminutive bank safe on a post. He dialed their number. A gravelly voice answered, belonging to a man named Earl, who seemed both bemused and intrigued by Johnson's proposition. "You serious about this, the Sentinel?" he questioned, a thread of incredulity woven into his tone. "Absolutely," Johnson asserted, voice taut with resolve. "I require something resilient." He sidestepped specifics, reluctant to share his feud with a stranger. Earl chuckled, a low rumble in his throat. "Well now, Mr. Johnson, the Sentinel ain't never backed down from a fight. We're talking quarter-inch steel, fortified welds. The thing tips the scales at around half a ton." Johnson's brows leaped north. "Half a ton? Give or take. Want it painted, or you prefer the raw, weathered look?" "Raw steel," Johnson declared. "Let it corrode. Let it stand as a testament to implacable will." The delivery bordered on the surreal. A flatbed typically reserved for bulldozers groaned its way down Willow Creek Lane, burdened by the mailbox's immense weight. A compact crane trailed it, its operators sporting a look of utter bewilderment mirrored by the assembled neighbors who'd emerged from their homes to witness the spectacle. Even Agnes Abernathy graced the event, perched on her porch swing, her face a study in disbelief. Johnson studiously avoided her gaze as the crane operator, after what seemed an age of painstaking adjustments, lowered the Sentinel into its prepared pit. It impacted with a ground-shaking thud that sent a flurry of birds spiraling from a nearby oak. The installation stretched on for hours. Earl, having personally journeyed from Pennsylvania to oversee the undertaking, proved a meticulous artisan. He layered concrete, calibrated the angle with laser precision, and scrutinized every weld with unwavering focus. Johnson stood nearby, offering unspoken support, occasionally mopping beads of perspiration from his forehead. As dusk painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, the Sentinel stood sentinel, a stark, unyielding presence marring the otherwise pristine landscape. It transcended mere mailbox status. It was a manifesto. A proclamation of defiance. A promise that Elijah Johnson would not submit. Agnes observed the entire procedure, her initial astonishment slowly curdling into a darker, more ominous emotion. The sheer audacity of it all, the blatant display of resistance, ignited a slow-burning anger within her. She clutched the swing's chains, knuckles bone-white, eyes narrowed to slits. The mailbox, in its cold, unyielding might, felt like a direct insult. It was a gauntlet thrown down, a challenge issued. Later that evening, As Johnson lay in his bed, the sentinel's silhouette a stark outline against the night sky, a modicum of satisfaction settled over him. He understood that this wasn't the culmination of his conflict with Agnes, but rather a crucial escalation. He had established a boundary, not in sand, but forged in reinforced steel. Agnes, meanwhile, remained in her dimly lit parlor, her face illuminated by the solitary glow of a lamp. Her gaze remained fixed on the monstrous mailbox outside. An idea, laced with recklessness and shadowed by desperation, began to germinate in her mind. It was a hazardous notion, born of desperation, but the seething rage within her mandated action. She would not be vanquished. She would not be belittled. She would devise a plan to eliminate that monstrosity, regardless of the consequences. The refrigerator's drone served as the room's only sound, a mechanical pulse in time with her growing determination. Steel versus SUV. Agnes gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. The mailbox, that defiant monument to Johnson's audacity, stood gleaming in the afternoon sun. A taunt. She'd had enough. Enough of the garden gnomes, enough of the overly manicured lawn, and certainly enough of that infernal mailbox. Today it ended. She put the SUV in drive, her foot heavy on the accelerator. The engine roared, a guttural growl of impending destruction. Agnes aimed, lining up the front bumper with the center of the mailbox. A surge of adrenaline coursed through her. This wasn't just about a mailbox. It was about control, about order, about her neighborhood. She closed her eyes for a brief, terrifying moment, picturing the satisfying splintering of wood, the collapse of metal. Then, she braced herself and hit it. The impact was not what she expected. Instead of a satisfying crunch, there was a violent, shuddering thud that reverberated through the entire vehicle. The steering wheel jerked violently in her hands. Agnes's head snapped forward, nearly cracking against the windshield. The airbag didn't deploy, thankfully, but the jolt left her momentarily stunned. She opened her eyes to a bizarre tableau. The mailbox, impossibly, was still standing. Not a scratch. Her SUV, on the other hand, was a different story. The front bumper was crumpled like tin foil. The grille was cracked, and a disconcerting plume of steam hissed from under the hood. A tire slowly deflated, a mournful sigh escaping its punctured side. Agnes stared in disbelief, her mouth agape. How? What was that thing made of? A wave of fury washed over her, eclipsing the initial shock. He'd rigged it. That man had deliberately set a trap. This was beyond landscaping violations, this was personal. She slammed the gear's shift into reverse, intending to try again, to finish the job, but the SUV just shuddered and groaned. It was dead. A mangled, smoking heap of defeat. As if on cue, doors started opening up and down the street. Mrs. Henderson from across the way, her curlers askew, emerged cautiously, clutching her cat. Mr. Peterson, perpetually watering his prize-winning roses, stopped mid-spray, his mouth a perfect O. Even the usually reclusive Miss Gable peered out from behind her lace curtains. And then there was Johnson. He strolled out of his house, hands in his pockets, a slow smile spreading across his face. He surveyed the scene, Agnes's wrecked SUV, the unscathed mailbox, the gawking neighbors, with an air of quiet satisfaction. "Afternoon, Agnes," he called out, his voice calm and even. "Having a little trouble there?" Agnes glared, unable to find words. She wanted to scream, to accuse him of sabotage, but the sight of the growing crowd silenced her. She was trapped, exposed, utterly humiliated. Johnson walked closer, stopping a safe distance from the disabled vehicle. "That's some pretty serious damage. You might want to call a tow truck." He chuckled softly. "And maybe a mechanic. Looks expensive." He patted the mailbox affectionately. "Solid construction, you know. They don't make 'em like this anymore." Agnes saw red. She flung open the car door, ignoring the sharp pain that shot up her leg, and stumbled out. "You did this!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Johnson. "You set me up!" Johnson raised an eyebrow, his smile widening. Set you up? Agnes, I simply replaced a mailbox. You're the one who decided to drive your car into it. He paused, letting his words sink in. Maybe you should consider taking an anger management class. The neighbors gasped. Agnes sputtered, her face contorted with rage. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But for now, she was stranded, defeated, and the laughingstock of the entire neighborhood. And Johnson, damn him, was standing there, victorious, beside his indestructible mailbox. As the tow truck arrived, flashing lights cutting through the afternoon sun, Elijah Johnson knew that the war had just begun. He also knew his mailbox would hold up. Justice and a kinder HOA. The projector sputtered, its beam painting a wavering rectangle on Mr. Johnson's garage door. A stunned quiet descended as the gathered neighbors watched, their faces lit by the unsteady light. Even the officers, previously impassive, shifted their weight, drawn in. Beside the machine, Mr. Johnson inhaled deeply. This, his voice boomed slightly from the amplified speaker, is the evidence I promised. The truth about what's been happening to my mailbox. Repeatedly. The grainy footage began. Agnes Abernathy's robin's egg blue SUV, garish and unforgettable, jumped the curb. The sickening crunch of yielding metal, the snap of splintering wood, the almost celebratory way she reversed and repeated the demolition. A wave of incredulous gasps washed through the onlookers. Agnes, arms crossed at the rear, wore a tight, brittle smile. As the projector showed the second, third, and fourth assaults, that smile began to fray. By the time the video concluded with her systematically ruining her front bumper against the reinforced steel, a feat of automotive self-destruction, her expression was a frozen mask of disbelief. That's manipulated," she croaked, her voice thin and reedy. "A complete fabrication. Johnson is trying to set me up." With practiced calm, Mr. Johnson clicked the remote, freezing the frame on a stark close-up of Agnes's license plate reflected in the mailbox's mirrored surface. "Doctored Agnes?" "Hardly. The timestamps correlate with the official police incident reports. And I rather suspect your insurer will find this compelling viewing." One of the officers stepped forward, his tone neutral but firm. "Ma'am, we'll need to ask you a few questions." Agnes's carefully constructed composure shattered. Color flooded her cheeks, and she stabbed a trembling finger toward Mr. Johnson's mailbox. That eyesore. It's a hazard. A blatant attempt to provoke damage. He knew I'd collide with it. Mrs. Peterson, her silver hair a beacon of reason, emerged from the crowd. "Enough, Agnes. We've all witnessed enough. Your behavior is disgraceful." The ensuing days moved at warp speed. The police investigation progressed rapidly. Agnes, confronted by mounting proof and social pressure, retained legal counsel and holed up in her residence, offering no comment. The HOA, galvanized by the irrefutable evidence and public outrage, called an emergency session. The community center hummed with apprehensive murmurs. The vote was swift and unequivocal. Agnes Abernathy was ousted from her position as HOA president. A collective exhale of relief seemed to physically lighten the room. Mrs. Peterson, nominated by acclamation, accepted the mantle with a pledge to restore equity and openness to the community. "We must begin to heal," she declared, her voice ringing with genuine compassion. "We must rebuild trust and foster a neighborhood where every resident feels safe and valued." Several weeks later, the community could finally breathe. The stifling tension that had pervaded the air began to dissipate. Children frolicked on the sidewalks without the shadow of Agnes's unpredictable driving. Neighbors congregated by fences, their conversations laced with laughter, not guarded whispers. Mr. Johnson stood in his yard, tending to his petunias. The steel mailbox, a silent guardian, caught the golden light of the afternoon. It had become more than just a repository for mail. It was a symbol of fortitude, of just recompense, and of a community uniting to defend what was right. A robin perched atop its sturdy frame, trilling a joyous melody. He smiled, a sincere, heartfelt smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. The neighborhood felt calmer, more compassionate. He felt a profound sense of peace. Across the street, Mrs. Peterson waved, her face radiating warmth. He returned the gesture, experiencing a sense of belonging he hadn't known in years. Even the mail carrier, who had previously regarded him with a sidelong glance, now delivered the mail with a friendly nod. While born from discord, the steel mailbox had inadvertently sparked a renewed sense of community. The damage to Agnes's car remained visible, a persistent memento of her actions, but the neighborhood was healing, moving ahead, and stronger for it.